Start with just about 5 minutes of just settling back in together, and then I will open up and say a few words. And for these 5 minutes, I'll give very, very little instruction, so just returning to what we've been practicing so far. It's wonderful to see you all. It's great to be here together. So, today I wanted to give a talk on something that's definitely been a dance in my own practice and relationship to meditation, and perhaps to some extent it's been a dance for you as well. And there's a lot of different ways to talk about like what this dance really is. One way that I think about it is kind of the difference between meditation being an art versus meditation being a science. Or another way to think about this might be maybe a goal orientation in meditation versus a intention orientation in meditation. And so often, I think for good reason, we hear that well, I would say we get mixed reports, but we hear that okay, well, meditation is supposed to be more of this art and this feeling and more intention oriented and less goal oriented. And I think that that's true. I think that's especially true and important for us to hear because our society, our perspective that we get soaked in so often is so heavily goal and maybe more rigidly oriented. And so it's really useful for us to say, okay, well, in this space, we can do something a little bit different. The interesting thing is, I don't know about you all, but I will say for myself, I'm not actually very good at either one of those kinds of perspectives, neither the goal and scientific-minded perspective, nor the intention or art-minded perspective. So I know that I can use support and practice in both areas. And I wanted to, I've been reading through this, it's almost like a travel journal of a translator of ancient Chinese works who went to a mountainous region of China just to meet hermits, to meet basically meditation hermits. And he has all of these interviews with these hermits who, rarely speak to anybody. And he kind of just encounters them on the way and asks them about meditation, asks them about life. And so I wanted to read a few of these, especially because they offer such contrasting perspectives. And I think there's a lot of value to be taken from all of them. So some of the language is a little bit more oriented towards Chinese meditation practices, and hopefully you can take that and see what resonates. And as I think it's Whitman who says, dismiss that which insults your soul. So I'll read a few of these. The interviewer, Bill Porter, he asks this hermit, this master, so what's the goal of your meditation practice? And he says, the goal is to return. The goal is to return to nothingness, or to return to the body of the Tao. That's what he calls it. And not only people, but plants and animals and all living things are part of this body. They're made of this body of the Tao, this body of nothingness. There aren't two different things in this universe. To realize this is the goal of meditation practice. There aren't two different things. To realize this is the goal of meditation practice. Everything in this world changes. What we're seeking is that which doesn't change. And then he says, well, how does a person reach that? How does a person reach that goal? Specifically, he uses the word goal. And the hermit responds, it's a matter of stages. There are many degrees of achievement. Interesting word to use there. There are many degrees of achievement, and it's hard to reach the goal. But once you have this as your goal, you just keep going, step by step, stage by stage. Everyone has different capabilities, but the goal is the same. The goal is to return to the body of the Tao. And if you practice, you'll eventually succeed. there's a lot more there, but as I was reading through that, I was struck by how achievement and goal oriented this was as I was reading through. And it made me reflect a little bit on the ways that this kind of idea of stages or different places or achievements has been both helpful and kind of distracting, or maybe wouldn't go so far as to say hurtful, but distracting to meditation practice. But I think it is valuable to highlight and understand, oh, there are predictable things that I can experience that other people have experienced. There are certain techniques or methods that will likely produce a certain effect in my mind, or maybe a certain amount of meditation practice. For example, the fact that we're on retreat right now, we're kind of believing that there's some kind of science here. There's some kind of, okay, the more that I do this, there's a dose response to meditation practice where something different is going to happen in my mind. We don't talk about this a lot in our group, but often in a lot of different traditional practices, there's certain stages or types of absorbed experiences of your mind that you might experience. And they're actually not so exotic or foreign or crazy. If you spend enough time, not even so long, actually, to some extent, we're probably all experiencing some of these different stages or predictable, describable experiences during this retreat. Or our mind will do this thing, or we'll feel good, but we feel good in this very specific way. And you can get better by reading other people's experiences at noticing, oh, I'm experiencing that same thing that this person thousands of years ago has described. And maybe they've described it in a beautiful poem that really captures how I feel too when I feel that way. And so there's a value here, because you can also then say, oh, when that person got stuck at that place, what did they do? What helped them? What are different techniques or methods to do this? So we start to get a little more scientific with our approach to meditation. Then we start to also maybe become a little too rigid, and rather than focusing on what our actual experience is, what we start to do is we kind of put this ontology, this what you might consider like an a priori ontology. So it's something that you're bringing to reality. You're saying, this is the way that I'm looking at the world, and I'm going to put it on my reality. And you start missing what your actual experience is. And so then we really need to balance this out by bringing more of this art into our experience. And so I'll read a different passage from later in this same book with a different hermit who says, everything comes from nothing and everything returns to nothing. This is the Tao. This is my understanding. I don't like to talk about this unless there's a reason. I know some people go around and they spread these teachings, but often their understanding is based on books. What they teach is what's in the books. They don't teach the things that come from the spirit. What I'm telling you comes from my own understanding, not from books. Nowadays, many people have become interested in practicing meditation. There are many books that teach this. But what they don't teach is that this isn't truly it. In meditation and yoga, you go through stages. But life and the Tao does not have any stages. People are misled by these books, by names, by powers, by experiences. after they've practiced for a while, they think they've gotten somewhere, but they haven't. There's nowhere to get. To follow the Tao, and to really practice, is to just keep returning. People lose this when they try to find it. So this is like the opposite perspective, where he's saying there's no stages, and as soon as you start to think that there's a stage, you are totally lost. So how can we find some middle ground between the two of these? Another kind of metaphor or angle or perspective that has always made sense to me, that one of my teachers used, is kind of like it's like GPS, or it's like a map. So there's the map, and then there's the territory, and you can use this map very effectively to say, oh yeah, I think I'm there, I started over here, okay, it seems like the best first place for me to go is here. But if you keep looking at that map and you've got your face in this map while you're walking around, you're totally missing everything that's going on around you. You might bump into something, you might trip and fall, you're probably totally missing the landmarks, and you're going to think you're somewhere that you're not. And so that gets really messy. That's not actually very valuable. So we have to start to bring some of this art in. And actually, this is associated with an entirely different type of brain activity. This more goal orientation is often associated with the more internal part of our brain, so ventromedial, prefrontal cortex, or our reward pathway. It's more oriented towards goals and achievement, and the same type of hits of kind of dopamine and other types of more easily categorized things that we find so much in our everyday life. And this is good. This is a standard functioning of our mind, and we should use it as well as we can. But there's a totally different way that our brain activates. It's more associated with the also frontal but outer parts of our brain. And these are all working in networks, so it's not just one part of the brain, but the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is more kind of on the side over here. And that's more oriented towards intention, towards, okay, how do I want to be? There's no moment where I'm there or not there, but I'm just going to keep steering back this way. It's more like a compass rather than a map. So you can think of that more compass orientation to say, okay, let me check in with my compass here. Oh, all right, I'm totally turned the wrong way. Or, okay, I'm turned the wrong way, but I need to, navigate what's right in front of me first, and then figure out how to turn back east or north or whatever it is. So there's two very, very different ways of being. And the piece that's so important about this, and I think this second hermit really touches on this, is that the goal isn't actually to get somewhere in particular in meditation practice. And when we get too hemmed into, okay, first there's this stage, and then my mind does this, and I can do all of these magical things with my mind, we actually miss the fact that the goal is to get better at heading in the direction that we want to head in. And so these different things that happen along the way, we start to realize, yes, having this categorized experience, very helpful. It's good for me to learn how to calm my mind down or feel these pleasant feelings. But what comes up along the way is actually what meditation practice is meant to help us out with. And so we might have scientific methods, but then we need to bring them to the real world. So as we get more into this intention state of mind, now we can start sinking into like, okay, well, my intention is to be calm or caring or loving, but what do I actually encounter when I sit down and try to breathe? And all of these unpleasant companions of mine that we've been talking about up until now, they start visiting me. That is actually the practice in and of itself. So sometimes we think that's distracting me from the practice. This is so pervasive. I myself certainly consistently feel this. Man, I'm sitting down to meditate. I wish I could just be present and be calm and be happy, whatever it is that we want to feel when we sit down. But what we're missing when we start to have those kinds of thoughts is, no, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing right now. This isn't something for me to work around or something for me to very skillfully just put at ease. Those are important skills to have too, because sometimes they're just so loud and intense that we can't even work with them. So we do need to learn how to, okay, how can I calm this down? How can I be more still in my body? Yes, all of the above. But then those are actually the meditation practice. So once we start to marry this kind of art perspective with the science perspective, the science being, okay, there are things that I can do, there are experiences that I can have, that can help me understand what's going on, and the art being, okay, how am I going to do this? It's getting a little weird. How do we actually do this in real life? How do we do a meditation practice that's not perfect? We start to encounter what in Buddhism would be called the three marks of existence. And different traditions actually highlight a lot of the same types of marks of existence or parts of reality. We encounter all sorts of things. These are just one way of categorizing them, another science, if you will. And you might find other ways that are more useful. Each tradition has all sorts of ways that you can then look at this messy, dusty world that we encounter. These three marks of existence are things that I think you all have heard me mention before with relation to diabetes. And you can translate them in different ways, but we can play around with translating them today, at least, as first one being suffering or dis-ease. A second one being change, constant change. And the third one being the impersonality of our world, the sense that we don't have control over what happens in our lives, and that actually extends even to our own minds most often, which is what we encounter so much in meditation practice. Each of these is a kind of a lens, and they're all really difficult things. The reason that we even highlight them is because they're supposed to be the three things that fundamentally we struggle with as human beings. And certainly we with diabetes are particularly intimate with these in particular. The physical discomfort, but also the emotional discomfort. The constant change of blood sugars. And the fact that it so often is really not up to us. We have to be careful in how we relate to these, but it's really useful to have them in the back of our minds as often as possible, and sometimes in the front of our minds, because so often they are actually a major source of what we're struggling with, and maybe why we're not able to relate to life in the way that we want to relate to life. Something is really physically uncomfortable, or maybe some thought pattern that I'm having. I'm disliking myself or disliking somebody close to me. Or I just feel anxious or uncomfortable with how much things are changing or feel unstable, or the way that I can't control them. All of them are actually lenses that we can intentionally put on in meditation practice too. And this is where I was also saying we have to be careful with how we relate to these, because we can have a very dry and negatively oriented practice if we're always only reflecting on these things. But you can also start a meditation practice, and we'll experiment with this a little bit today, where you're sitting and you find some ease, you find some strength in your body, and then you just open yourself up to noticing how is discomfort or dis-ease manifesting itself right now in my experience. And often when you take that lens, it's really also useful to pair it with noticing how things are changing. Because the interesting thing for each of these is that they kind of cure each other in their own way. So the cure or the solution for discomfort is noticing the way that even your discomfort is unsteady and that it's also changing and disappearing. And actually feeling the immense relief of, oh, that felt bad. It doesn't feel bad anymore. And seeing what's left over there. So that's a lens that we can actually take up, noticing all the different places. Oh, my hip is a little uncomfortable, or this thought is really disturbing for me. I really don't like that. And then if I keep paying really close attention, oh yeah, it's not there anymore. I might still be there. I might still be ruminating on it or tense because of it, but it's not there anymore. And to feel the release and relief of it's not there. That's one angle. We can also take up the angle as a more primary angle of everything is changing. And we can notice in our body or in our experience or in the sounds around us that things are not consistent. This is obviously a really useful one for blood sugars as well. It helps us relate to the fact that those are also always changing, but that's actually not different than the rest of the world. So we take that lens up. And then similarly, as I mentioned before, well, that can be kind of stressful. It can be kind of anxiety provoking, noticing that things are constantly moving and changing. All right, what's the solution for that? The solution for that has nothing to do with me. I don't need to do anything about all these things that are changing. And you start to lean into that, and you get to actually just relax. It's like kind of like enjoying the show. You're like, oh yeah, those cars are just passing by. I don't have to do anything about that. That's amazing. The rest of my life, I have to do all these things. Somebody tells me this thing, I have to remember it. I have to do a task. I have to brush my teeth at night because you're supposed to do that. Whatever. Whether it's a small thing or a big thing. But when you're sitting there in meditation and you start noticing all the things that are changing, you can find an immense amount of relief in the fact that you don't have to do anything about any of it. In fact, you don't even need to notice it, and it'll still keep changing. And that is just such a relief. All right, how am I going to tie this in? What's the relief of not being in control of anything? That's a little more difficult. So this is such an interesting one because so often when we start meditation practice, one of the first practices that we're given is to count breaths. I'm sure at some point all of us have done some kind of meditation practice where you count your breaths. And I've always kind of mused about this as like, I don't know. I mean, first of all, that's a very Buddhist-oriented practice for a number of different reasons. Other traditions would probably find a different type of practice much more useful. And there's something very masochistic about that practice because it's like intentionally the most boring practice, and it's like it's just baiting you to not be able to keep doing it, and nobody can do it because it's so boring. And that's kind of the point, actually. You're kind of poked into, see, you can't control your mind. Why try? But give a little bit of effort so you can just keep coming back. So it's actually a practice that's meant to frustrate you. And the real, and you can try this next time you do a breath counting practice. Maybe some week coming up we'll do this just to experiment with it. The real gift or teaching or delight of that practice is realizing at a certain point that you're treating this breath counting practice like this life or death matter, and it's so stressful. You're sitting there and you get so frustrated. Oh, again, I can't believe I lost this again. And then at a certain point, you realize this doesn't fucking matter. I'm just counting my breaths. There's nothing at stake here. Like, this could be the most relaxing thing. Nobody will even know if I stop counting my breaths. What a gift. That's such a gift. But we have to kind of frustrate and exhaust ourselves to the point of having a moment where we're like, oh yeah, I don't actually need to care about this that much. That's okay. The relief or release of not being in control of things kind of exists in itself. But really, it's not the going back to what we were calling disease or suffering or change. Those aren't necessarily the relief or release of not being in control of things, or your experience not being personal. The real relief there is you realize how much we start to impact each other. If my experience isn't personal, what is it? It's interpersonal. It's not just impersonal, but it's related to all of you. All of you, seeing your faces has an impact on me right now. I feel touched and happy seeing faces of people that I like. And I referred to the late Thich Nhat Hanh earlier, who was a famous meditation teacher. He passed away a few years ago. And he referred to this as interbeing. He referred to this, so that's the relief. Once our experience is not so personal, not so about me all of the time, oh, my thoughts are changing because of this and that. Once it becomes impersonal, it can become interpersonal. And we can start to realize the joy of being impacted by each other. And the messiness, too. It's not only joy, but it's the reality. We stop ignoring the fact that it is this way. So these are 3 ways that we can start to navigate this art. We can start to navigate the actual, what happens on the ground when we sit down in meditation practice. So there's the art side and there's the science side. So we use this science-y perspective to recognize certain parts of our own experience. And there's all sorts of other science-y, and by science-y I really mean let's call it like more left-brained or organized perspectives on what we might encounter. And when we feel ready, we can also drop those after a while. Often it's useful to sit for a while, to have a half-day retreat or a longer retreat before you're really able to say, all right, I'm just going to sit here and just see what happens. But we can do that too. That's the more art side of things. And at any given moment, your mind might need a little bit more of this science-y stuff. Just need a little bit more to grab onto, a little bit more to hold on to guide me. Or it might need to let go of some of that stuff. Okay. Let's just let it unfold. It's not up to me. I don't need to control all of this. And so those 3 marks of existence are one way that we can start to do something a little bit in between. We can start to navigate the actual territory with a little bit of a science-y, scientific mind, but without putting too much on our experience. Okay. There's one quote that I wanted to end with. In meditation practice, there's a great deal to learn, but you can't do it quickly. This isn't really something that can be put into words. You have to practice it to understand. Lao Tzu teaches us to be natural. You can't force things, including your practice. Understanding is something that happens naturally. It's different for everyone. The main thing is to quiet your mind. takes a long time, and you have to stay healthy. I love this last one, the way that this hermit balances this perspective of, okay, it's going to take a while. Don't rush. There's another ancient Chinese Zen master that says, the faster you hurry, the slower you go. The faster you hurry, the slower you go. So don't rush. We're getting there. We're moving in the right direction. And just keep at it. All right, y'all. Let's take a 10-minute break. And then soon we'll do one practice after that, and then we'll have a much longer break. So resource yourself for a few minutes. We'll practice, and then you can really let loose for a bit. See you all soon.